Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on a kind of secret history, really. We're talking about the legends behind the legends. The tigers and dragons. And these aren't just, characters you see on screen. These are the actual people, the highly specialized martial artists who basically built the golden age of Hong Kong action cinema. We're talking about men who risk absolutely everything, life and limb, with every single take.
It's such a crucial piece of film history to explore, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what we're doing here is really tracing their whole journey, looking at their careers, the just astronomical physical risks they took on, the really tough financial realities of doing such a dangerous job, and then this massive shift they had to navigate geographically, technologically. These performers were extraordinary, truly.
Right. So our mission for you listening is to really get under the skin of one core question. How does a legacy that's built entirely on physical pain, on peak human performance, how does that survive when the industry that birthed it just completely changes the rules? We want to give you a really comprehensive look at the foundations of physical action in Chinese cinema, looking at some surprising, maybe even shocking facts that underpin what was arguably the most exhilarating movie era ever.
And we really have to start with the time frame, put it in context. That label, Meisters Tigre y Dragon, it really belongs to that golden era. The people who actually earn that name, well, they're mostly in their 60s or 70s now. So what we're examining is very much history. It's not really the present-day reality for most of them.
Okay.
I mean, sure, some are still giants in choreography, absolute masters. But the majority, they've stepped away. Tsui Hark, who's a legend in his own right, he even said it, that raw, almost chaotic energy, the spontaneous high-risk stuff that defined the peak.
The 80s and 90s?
Yeah, the 80s, 90s. He feels it's basically impossible to repeat today. The conditions just aren't there anymore.
Okay, so that really sets up our main question then. What happens to a craft and to the artists themselves when that fundamental deal, the one built on maximum physical skill and, frankly, a willingness to endure serious pain, gets completely rewritten by things like technology, safety concerns, and just basic economics?
Right, so to understand where things are now, we absolutely have to go back to the crucible, you could call it, of that golden era. Because this wasn't just showing up for a job, was it? It was this intense, super competitive subculture, and it was organized around these specific, almost family structure.
It had a very particular structure, yeah. Almost feudal, you could say, but incredibly dynamic at the same time. We hear about these legendary families of specialists, that teams run by the giants, people like Cheng, Lu, Yu, Yuan, Hong.
The big names.
The biggest name. You said feudal, and I see that, but I also think of it like competing sports leagues or maybe rival martial arts schools, There was this immense pride, almost tribal, in showing off work that was better, more dangerous, more precise than what the other team was doing.
And that constant competition, it forced innovation. It forced extreme skill levels.
It sounds amazing for us, the audience, watching those films.
Yeah.
But for the guys doing it, it must have been a terrifying pressure cooker. And the time they had to actually make hay while the sun shone, so to speak, was incredibly short.
That's a brutal truth. The human body is the ultimate limiting factor here. We've got to be honest about the timeline of this craft. That physical peak, especially for the kind of high-impact, high-frequency work in classic Hong Kong action, it's really tightly packed between, say, 20 and 30 years old.
Just a decade.
Maybe a bit more, but yeah. Once a performer hits 40, maybe even late 30s, the body's ability to recover just plummets. Think about the wear and tear, major joints, spine damage from repeated falls, chronic tendon issues. At that point, the physical demands basically force a career change. You have to move sideways, maybe into acting if you had the look, or into choreography if you had the mind for it. Or if you weren't quite skilled enough in those other areas, you often just faded away into obscurity.
So maybe 10, 15 years max of peak earning potential combined with maximum risk. And if you didn't become a recognizable star or a top choreographer in that window, the industry just didn't have a place for you anymore.
Pretty much.
This brings us to a really specific example that just perfectly illustrates that cruel reality. Xiao Hou.
Xiao Hou.
Yes.
An undisputed master. He was a disciple of Fan Zhua, and his peers, his contemporaries, were people who later became huge names like Lin Zhengying and Meng Hai.
Right.
And you hear experts, people who really know, citing him, and this is incredibly high praise, as potentially the most potent martial artist of his whole generation. Just raw power and flawless technique.
And you see in the films, his work is astonishing when you go back and watch. He was key in movies that really showcased genuine martial skill, like Peely 10 Heroes in 85, Crazy Monkey back in 79, 18 Martial Arts in 82. This wasn't fancy wire work. This was pure physical commitment. You felt the impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he never reached that household name status. Not like a Jackie Chan or a Sammo Hung. And this is the tragic irony, really, of fame within that specific studio system back then. Despite this immense talent, his physical look just wasn't deemed commercial.
He didn't fit the mold.
Didn't fit the leading man mold, didn't perhaps have the broad comedic timing that the studios wanted for exporting films globally. He looked tough, serious.
So his peak physical ability was definitely recognized and used, exploited even, but his market value as a potential star was limited from the start.
Exactly that. Yeah. So when the big studio structures like the Shaw Brothers started closing down or changing their whole business model, his options just dried up, vanished. He did try to shift into choreography, logically using his technical expertise, but ultimately, he just stepped away from the film industry altogether. And it's a really common, quite poignant story. For every big action star who successfully made that jump to directing or choreography, there are countless others. Talented people like Xiao Hou, whose incredible skill ultimately led to, well, an early forced retirement. Or just obscurity.
Yeah.
Their whole identity was so tied up in that peak physical prowess that apparently many of them, when researchers or documentary makers approached them later in life, they refused to be filmed. They didn't want to be seen as, diminished or in decline.
That's understandable, but incredibly sad. Like an identity crisis driven entirely by physical limits. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the money. The financial environment that both enabled this peak performance, but also arguably exploited it. The economics of risk in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, the money was definitely a powerful motivator. It almost had to be to justify the danger involved. So back in the 70s and 80s in Hong Kong, a skilled action specialist could pull in around 2,000 Hong Kong dollars a month.
Okay, 2,000 HKD. How does that stack up?
Well, that figure only really hits home when you compare it to the alternative. A standard office job, like a clerk at that time, you'd be lucky to make 100, maybe 200 HKD a month.
Wait, so 10 to 20 times more than a regular white-collar worker?
Exactly. It's a massive, life-changing difference in income.
Okay, that's huge. But the question is, was even that kind of money truly enough compensation for the constant risk of permanent injury or even death?
That is the absolute crux of it. The pay was fantastic in the moment, but the job security, zero, non-existent. And this dynamic, it created this really unique kind of behavioral economics, you could say.
How so?
These specialists lived day in and day out with the knowledge that any job, any stunt, could be the one that ended their career, could leave them crippled, penniless.
That sounds like a very fatalistic way to live.
It had to be. And that insecurity, it really fostered a culture of, well, spend it now because there might not be a tomorrow. They had to capitalize immediately on that very brief high-earning window.
So what do they spend it on?
Immediate needs, mostly. Supporting huge extended families was common. Often they were the one person lifting entire families out of poverty. And yes, sometimes the high-risk lifestyle bled over. Gambling, horse races, activities that sort of mirrored the risks they took on set. The money was a reward for taking risks, definitely, but it didn't buy them safety nets or a secure future.
And the official support systems, the institutions, they just weren't there for them, were they? I mean, I can't imagine insurance companies were lining up to cover guys who jump off buildings for a living.
Oh, it was an absolute nightmare. Forget it. Insurance companies wouldn't go near them. We hear stories of specialists having to literally lie on application forms.
Really?
Yeah, claiming they had safe jobs, like being a clerk or a driver, just to get any basic personal insurance accepted. The system offered absolutely zero institutional protection, which meant the safety net had to be entirely social. Informal.
So who filled that gap if the companies and insurers wouldn't step up?
That huge responsibility usually fell onto the team leader, the most respected senior guy in the group, the one they often called the older brother, the Daiji.
Ah, the Daiji.
Yeah, he essentially became the informal personal safety net.
Yeah.
If someone on his team got hurt, the Daiji was often the one digging into his own pocket to cover medical bills, maybe giving stipends to the family while the guy recovered, making sure the injured performer wasn't just abandoned. It was a massive financial and ethical weight on the shoulders of the action director or the senior performer.
Wow. But even for the guys lower down the ladder, the ones paid day to day, There's this systemic trap waiting for them, wasn't there? Something about injuries showing up later.
This is one of the most devastating details, I think, showing how the system failed them.
Yeah.
If you were just a daily hire, paid for that day's work, and you got injured, maybe something like a spinal issue that develops slowly, or internal bruising that only becomes debilitating after you've gone home, after you've left the set, you had no recourse. None. Because it wasn't reported during the shoot day, it technically didn't count as a work accident. The production company could just shrug, claim they didn't know, and the entire cost, medical loss of earnings fell square on the injured person.
That's truly awful, just leaves them completely vulnerable. And we have a story, a really visceral anecdote that drives home exactly what that professional risk looked like in practice, especially for those outside hires, the external doubles who weren't necessarily part of a core team family.
Yeah, this incident comes up a lot when people talk about the negligence of that era. It involved 2 external doubles, guys hired just for this specific, very dangerous stunt. They had to jump from a 3rd-floor rooftop.
Okay, landing on
Just 3 layers of thin cardboard boxes. Stacked up, it maybe offered about 2 meters, 6-7 feet of cushioning, which is woefully inadequate for that height.
Yeah, sounds terrifyingly inadequate. And the result was predictable, I guess, and tragic.
Completely. One of the doubles either missed the boxes slightly or the boxes just collapsed under the impact, and he landed badly. Suffered severe nerve damage to his coccyx, the tailbone.
Oh, God.
He was immobilized. Instantly. Career over. Permanently disabled from that one jump. The absolute lack of proper preparation and safety equipment was laid bare in the most brutal way possible.
And the reaction from the production company afterwards, that tells its own story, doesn't it?
It perfectly captures the institutional attitude back then. The company went straight into damage control mode. They covered only the bare minimum, the immediate medical bills, and then they immediately shifted all further responsibility onto the action director who had hired the doubles in the first place.
So the guy who designed the stunt had to pay.
He was forced to personally pay a huge sum, potentially ruinous for him, to the injured double out of his own pocket. It just perfectly sums up the unspoken contract of the Golan era. The studio gets the spectacular footage, profits from the risk, but the ultimate cost, the human cost, was almost always borne by the individual performer or the choreographer footing the bill.
Okay, so that era, the era of personal financial ruin being a real possibility, and that extreme, often unnecessary physical sacrifice, it clearly couldn't last forever. And those terrifying stories lead us right into the modern age, don't they? The big question becomes, how do you keep that spirit of fighting that visceral energy audiences still crave when technology and, frankly, liability laws basically forbid the kinds of insane risks that built the whole genre?
It really demanded a fundamental rethink, a philosophical pivot almost.
Yeah.
Because with digital effects becoming so accessible and sophisticated, a lot of those classic really dangerous stunts, well, even if the performer can still do them, they often just aren't performed physically anymore.
Too risky.
The liability is just too high for the production. The financial risk to the studio, if something goes wrong, is enormous compared to the cost of digital effects.
Right. And this key change, this transition, we see it reflected in the approach of people like Xuanzhao.
Xuanzhao is a great example. He explicitly talked about this shift in his own work. He said he moved his focus away from the old mantra of making it absolutely real to a new imperative, making it safe and credible.
Safe and credible. Okay.
And the thinking behind this, which seems to have worked, is based on the audience's understanding now. Today's audience, they kind of implicitly accept the fictional nature of big-budget action. Right?
Meaning, we all know the hero didn't really jump off that 13-story building, no matter how good the shot looks.
Exactly. That underlying acceptance, that audience sophistication, it actually empowers the choreographer. It allows them to prioritize clever design, dynamic presentation, visual storytelling over demanding actual physical impossibility from the performers. If the overall visual spectacle is breathtaking, if the choreography itself is dynamic and inventive, and if the way it's shot and edited is flawless, the audience accepts the artifice. And that's a massive win for performer safety because you can create that huge impact without needing someone to risk breaking their coccyx.
So the value proposition for the stunt performer shifts, maybe, from being primarily a risk taker, a kind of human sacrifice, to being more of a physical designer, a movement artist, contributing to the concept.
In part, yes, but crucially, it doesn't mean that the spirit of struggle, as some call it, has died out completely. There's still this enduring critical value placed on the ability to physically do things others can't. The difference now is that it must be done with proper preparation, with technical safety measures in place under controlled conditions. The physical ability is still the foundation, but how it's applied is radically different.
Right. And this commitment to maintaining that peak physical ability, that dedication, even when technology offers easier ways out, it's still championed by the veterans themselves, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You see that rigor perfectly embodied by someone like Xiong Xinxin. He's getting close to 60 now, but he still maintains just impeccable physical form. And he's a really powerful voice arguing that as an instructor, as a choreographer, you have to be able to do, not just say.
Lead by example.
Exactly. For him, keeping that physical rigor is fundamental to his credibility. It's about respecting the craft.
He's basically using his own aging body as the benchmark, isn't he? Kind of daring the younger generation.
It's a powerful statement. His argument essentially is, look, if a man my age can still execute these complex, demanding moves with proper form and power, then young artists who are in their physical prime, they should show that same level of dedication, that same commitment. It's about discipline, about honoring the profession.
Yeah, I get that. But even he acknowledges that the modern environment, the industry itself, kind of works against that old school rigor now.
He's very aware of the systemic problems. He confirms that the raw spirit, the desire to work hard, it definitely exists among the new generation of talent, especially on the mainland. But the external factors, they're often discouraging it.
Like what?
Things like changes in technical support, the relentless pressure for speed and production, and maybe, most importantly, the lack of financial investment needed for proper extended training time. It just doesn't favor that demanding, time-consuming hard work that was essential for developing classic action skills anymore.
Right. Why spend a month perfecting a complex fall?
When a wire rig and some CGI can solve the sequence in an afternoon, that's the calculation productions are making now.
Okay, that pivot towards speed, towards maybe good enough rather than perfect, brings us directly to probably the single most defining event in the recent history of this action industry. The huge geographic shift that seems to have fundamentally lowered the professional baseline. We're talking about the great migration of action production. Away from Hong Kong and onto the mainland.
Yeah, that shift really kicked into high gear starting in the 1990s. And initially, the big driver was the opportunity to shoot period TV series on the continent. You had access to cheaper labor, vast authentic locations, and often government support or incentives.
Sounds good on paper.
On paper, maybe. But that transition immediately introduced some serious structural problems. And the main culprit was the absolutely unforgiving pace of television production compared to film.
And speed, as we know, is usually the enemy of quality and safety when it comes to complex choreography.
It's the absolute enemy. Think about it. In the golden age of Hong Kong film, a production might easily allocate a full week, maybe even more, just to design, rehearse, and perfectly execute one major fight sequence.
Right.
Television. They demanded production speed on a completely different level. We're talking about needing to generate enough finished footage for maybe 3 episodes in a single day, which means you have to figure out and shoot complex action sequences in just a matter of hours.
Hours, not days or weeks. So if you need that kind of speed, you inevitably start relying on quick fixes, things that require less prep time, maybe less raw skill from everyone involved.
That's exactly what happened. The TV production model fostered this dependence on shortcuts. You started seeing much more obvious wire work, excessive use of cables that weren't hidden well, a heavy reliance on trampolines just out of shot to give people momentum, lots of heavy padding visible on performers, and maybe worst of all, a shift towards static poses, you know, where actors just kind of hold dramatic fighting stances instead of engaging in genuinely dynamic, flowing choreography.
The pose and strike approach.
Kind of, yeah. And this created what you might call a minimum acceptable standard. But the crucial thing is this minimum standard proved commercially viable. Audiences watched it, networks bought it. And once investors figured out they could make money hitting just that minimum bar, well, that approach started to consolidate. It became entrenched in a large segment of the industry.
It's pretty disheartening when you hear the veterans talk about how that impacted the actual craft. Xiong Xinxin's observations, they sound quite scathing.
They are. He talks about seeing complex action sequences, things that should have taken serious time, being resolved. That's the term used in as little as 2 hours.
2 hours.
Yeah. Sequences that, back in the Hong Kong Golden Age, would have demanded a full day, maybe more, of meticulous rehearsal, Careful lighting setup, multiple camera angles.
And the quality suffered.
Hugely, according to him. Often poor camera placement that didn't capture the action well, rushed lighting that looked flat, and sequences that just lacked real impact or credibility. And the consensus among the veterans seems to be the whole ecosystem kind of lowered its standards together. The investors, the producers, the directors, even some actors, they collectively accepted a lower bar for what constituted good action.
And alongside that drop in quality standards, the financial reality for the actual action teams took a massive hit too, right? The leverage they had in Hong Kong based on their unique, high-risk skills that seemed to evaporate when they moved into this new, less structured environment.
Oh, the comparison is brutal.
Yeah.
The information we have confirms that salaries for action teams working on the mainland just plummeted. Sometimes they were being paid roughly the same as like a makeup assistant on the set.
Wow, from highly paid specialists to
basically low-paid technicians.
Right.
All that financial prestige, the status, the compensation that arguably justified the immense risk back in Hong Kong. Just disappeared for many.
And the root cause, as you touched on earlier, seems to be the lack of that institutional framework, the kind of guild structure that, even if imperfectly, existed back in Hong Kong.
Exactly.
Yep.
Hong Kong, partly due to facing pressures from potential unionization and the rising power of stars, had developed things like the Stunt Doubles Guild. And that guild, even if it couldn't guarantee absolute safety on set, it did help regulate pay rates, push for standardized raises, manage working hours to some extent. That kind of structure is largely absent on the mainland, leaving individual action directors and their teams much more exposed, much more vulnerable to having their rates pushed down.
Right. Let's talk about that specific example you mentioned, the one that really illustrates this devaluation of the craft, that financial insult aimed at an experienced action director.
Yeah, it's a really potent little story that shows this systemic issue. You have an established action director, a veteran, someone bringing decades of world-class expertise to the table. He's initially offered, say, 300,000 RMB for a project, which is, a respectable, fair fee for that level of work.
Okay.
But then almost immediately a different investor or maybe a producer involved in the project tries to undercut that.
Yeah.
Tries to force the fee down to maybe 100,000 RMB.
A two-thirds reduction, just like that.
Just like that. And it's more than just hard bargaining. For the veteran community, hearing stories like that, it's seen as a profound insult, not just to the individual, but to the entire craft. It basically implies that all that accumulated skill, those years of brutal physical training, the specific methodologies they developed, the risks they still manage, it's only worth a third of what it should be.
Yeah.
And without a strong guild structure to back them up, say, no, this is the standard rate, the director is put in a terrible position. Either accept the lowball offer or risk losing the job entirely, which then impacts the wages and livelihoods of their entire team. It just starkly highlights how, without that institutional protection, physical mastery gets treated like it's disposable, like it's a commodity you can get at a heavy discount.
Okay, so while that last section painted a pretty worrying picture, devaluation, lowered standards, the future isn't necessarily all Blake, is it? Because the sheer scale of the talent pool that's emerged on the mainland, it presents this unique, really powerful opportunity if it can be harnessed properly.
That's the fascinating dynamic right now. You see this stark contrast in where the talent is coming from. In Hong Kong today, because the annual volume of film production is relatively low compared to the past, frankly, fewer young people are choosing to go down that traditional arduous martial arts path with the specific goal of getting into movies. The interest isn't as high, and the supporting infrastructure has shrunk.
But on the mainland...
Meanwhile, on the mainland, you have these absolutely enormous Wushu schools that are just booming. They're churning out a seemingly inexhaustible supply of young people who are incredibly disciplined, highly athletic, and physically very capable performers.
And when you say enormous schools, the scale is hard to comprehend, right?
It really is. Take the Tagu School, for example. It's located in Henan Province near the famous Shaolin Temple. This is just one school, a single institution, and reports suggest it's large enough to house and train up to 100,000 students at a time.
100,000 in one school?
It's staggering. And this massive pool, these kinds of schools, they've become the primary feeder system for the modern generation of screen martial artists. They've produced huge stars that audiences know today, people like Xuanzhao, Wu Jing, Zhang Jin, Wu Yu.
Right, the big names in contemporary action.
Many of them came through that system.
Okay, so you have this immense reservoir of raw physical talent concentrated on the mainland. But the refined cinematic expertise, the decades of practical knowledge about how to stage, shoot, and edit action for maximum impact, that still largely resides with the Hong Kong veterans. Is that the synthesis Wei Junzi talks about?
That really is the essential dynamic shaping modern Chinese action cinema, yes. The raw physical material, the sheer athletic potential, is now primarily sourced from the continent. But the established, proven experience, the professional standards for things like lighting, camera framing, dynamic choreography that tells a story, that knowledge base still belongs overwhelmingly to the Hong Kong veterans.
They know how to shape the raw clay.
Exactly. They know how to take that incredible raw potential and transform it into world-class, globally appealing cinematic action.
And this helps explain why, even though so much production has moved geographically, the biggest commercial action hits coming out of mainland China today are still often directed by those Hong Kong veterans, right? People like Dante Lam, Sui Hark, Andrew Lau.
They remain absolutely crucial. They are the bridge. They represent the institutional memory. They carry the standards forward. They understand pacing, how to connect action to emotion, and crucially, they know how to safely maximize the impact of high-level physical skill on screen. And this specific methodology, this way of working that was forged under intense pressure back in Hong Kong, it's become incredibly influential around the world.
You really do see the fingerprints of Hong Kong action legacy everywhere in global action cinema now, don't you?
It's unmistakable. You look at huge Hollywood franchises like, say, John Wick, or even British spy movies like Kingsman. They actively borrow from and prioritize the core methodologies that were pioneered by those Hong Kong stunt teams.
What specifically?
Things like emphasizing real complex choreography that you can actually see. Using wider camera shots that prove the actor, or their highly skilled double, is actually performing the demanding moves. Maintaining a team of well-trained doubles rather than just relying purely on shaky cam or rapid-fire editing to hide a lack of skill. Hollywood and international action cinema generally increasingly values that specific blend of rigorous training, choreographic precision, and physical storytelling that the HK specialist teams perfected and then subsequently taught to the world as they dispersed globally.
So the standard didn't die out, it became a global export. That's fascinating. And domestically, within Hong Kong itself, there are still active, organized efforts trying to preserve that specific professional standard, aren't there? Even though the local production volume is lower now.
Yes, exactly. The focus seems to have shifted somewhat from mass production towards maybe pedagogical preservation, passing the torch. So back in 2018, Kar-lok, when he was president of the Stunt Doubles Guild, he initiated a really important training program. It was specifically designed for the next generation, for young specialists in Hong Kong.
And this wasn't just informal mentoring.
No, it was more structured. A formal effort to try and standardize the training, elevate the craft, and ensure that specialized knowledge wasn't lost.
How did that training model work? Was it just focused on, like, acrobatics and fighting?
It was designed to be much broader, actually, more like a specialized track within a film school. The idea was comprehensive transmission of knowledge. So yes, it emphasized the practical skills, the falls, the fights, the wire work, but also crucial elements like safety protocols, the communication skills needed to work effectively on a chaotic film set, and the ethical responsibilities of being part of a professional action team. It's really treating the craft as a legitimate, complex film discipline that needs formal training.
That makes sense. And since they can't rely on sheer volume of work anymore to keep that network strong, the community itself, the social bonds, they've become even more important as a way to archive the knowledge and maintain the support structure.
That seems to be the ultimate form of preservation now. Since everyone acknowledges that a true return to the crazy output of the 80s and 90s is just unrealistic, maintaining the network, keeping the spirit alive, is paramount. The community stays connected through regular professional meetings, sharing knowledge, looking out for each other, and maybe most symbolically, through the annual spring banquet they hold during the Lunar New Year. That gathering, it serves as this powerful annual reminder of their shared history, the collective risks they all took, and the mutual support that's always been crucial. It helps ensure that the legacy of the Tigers and Dragons, even as the original generation retires, remains connected to the lifeblood of the industry they quite literally built with their bodies. #outro. So when you put all these pieces together, the brutal economics of the past, the absolute necessity of the digital shift for safety, the huge geographical migration of talent, The conclusion seems pretty clear, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The material really confirms that it's not just unrealistic, but probably undesirable to try and somehow recreate that incredibly dangerous, often negligent environment of the Golden Age.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to go back to people getting permanently injured for lack of cardboard boxes.
Exactly. However, that essential spirit, they forged that incredible technical rigor, the uncompromising teamwork, the constant push for innovation, combined now with a much stronger insistence on safety and just sheer artistic ambition.
Yeah.
That spirit is absolutely inheritable. It can be passed on.
And it sounds like the future, not just for Chinese action cinema, but maybe for global action cinema too, really hinges on getting that synthesis right, on seamlessly blending that immense pool of raw physical talent coming from places like the mainland's Wushu schools, combining that with the specialized craft, the hard-won professional standards, and the invaluable veteran expertise that's been passed down by the Hong Kong action pioneers. That synthesis feels like it's not just the best path forward for continued success. Maybe it's the only path that truly honors the incredible physical sacrifices of the past while also prioritizing the safety and well-being of performers today.
Well said. And this whole transition we've discussed, from prioritizing making it real at any cost to making it safe and credible, it brings us right back to where we started, thinking of the audience. We talk about how safety and credibility are now paramount, partly because the audience accepts the artifice. Right? They know the 13-story fall isn't real.
Right.
So if the audience is already engaging with action on the level of deliberately designed reality, accepting illusion, it makes you wonder what other foundational realities of action cinema might change next. Could the focus eventually shift even further away from celebrating sheer physical mastery towards prizing pure design sophistication and digital artistry above all else?
That's a really interesting thought.
And if it does, how will that continued evolution further challenge and perhaps ultimately redefine the legacy of those original, risk-taking, truly death-defying tigers and dragons?
Something definitely for all of us to mull over as the industry keeps changing. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.